If you are feeling prayed up, put a word in the chat box here that describes how you're feeling right now. Just give us a word or a phrase. How are you feeling right now? Mwah. Well, this morning we are concluding our two-part Sunday message series based on the power of affirmative prayer, part 2. Now, I was going to say part 2. Now, I just have to share with you, though, that this week I was reminded that depending on what faith tradition you grew up in, many of us were taught that prayer is all about asking something of God, asking God for something. And obviously, you know, this is why kids are so good at this, right? I mean, this is why they do this so well. Like little Jenny, who prayed, "Dear God, please put another holiday between Christmas and Easter. There's just nothing good there now." Or Sarah, who said this at the dinner table one night, "Dear God, please change the taste of asparagus. It's grass." And then there's Jacob, who actually wrote this prayer in a letter. "Dear God, are you a ninja? Is that why I can't see you?" Of course, kids aren't the only ones whose prayer practice involves asking God for something. I remember a woman once who prayed, "Dear God, my prayer this year is for a fat bank account and a thin body, but please don't mix it up like you did last year." Oh my goodness, look at all these great descriptions. Solid. Way to go, Nita. Blessed. Judy says blessed, thankful, energized, heavenly meditated, my sister. Yes, peaceful, wonderful, peaceful, happy, grateful, filled with love. Awesome, Cupcake. Awesome. Now, last Sunday, when we last left off, in the power of affirmative prayer part 1, I shared with you that in the midst of so much chaos going on in the world, that I found myself asking myself, am I living in the twilight zone? And I have a unique perspective on the twilight zone because in my former career, that was one of the shows that I worked on, which was an honor because it's iconic, right? I was a co-producer on one of the reboot series of this TV show. And so I understand on a very deep level what literary license is, like what that device is as a storytelling mechanism. Now, this week, I am asking myself a completely different question. And the question that I'm asking myself this week is, am I living in an Alfred Hitchcock film? And here's what I mean by this. Alfred Hitchcock was a master of suspense, from Psycho to The Birds, from Vertigo to Rear Window, Rebecca, North by Northwest. I mean, he really was a master of creating high drama and fear, like no one else. I mean, he made over 50 films, and each one is a masterpiece. And so the reason that I asked myself, am I living in an Alfred Hitchcock film, is because this week in the national news, we're seeing reports that in Western states like California and Oregon and Washington, they are on fire. And the damage is just devastating. And, meanwhile, many of our kiddos are still stuck at home. Millions are out of work. And there continues to be unrest in our streets, especially around the issues of social justice. And last week actually marked the 6th month since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. And during this span of time, over 190,000 Americans have lost their lives, and over 6 million cases have been recorded in the United States. And so the reason that I asked myself, am I living in an Alfred Hitchcock film, is because, it's almost like, there's a main character, like one that you might see in a Hitchcock film, who consistently, voluntarily incriminates himself, yet has no concern whatsoever for being held accountable. For example, and these are just a few creative ideas for plot points, because this would never happen in real life. So, for example, there might be a scene in which this main character might say something completely maniacal, like, I could shoot someone in the middle of the street in broad daylight and get away with it. Or, like in one of those disaster types of films, there might be a scene where the main character knowingly records a public interview and admits that he had knowledge about a deadly germ that could have prevented tens of thousands of deaths, tens of thousands of people from dying when they didn't have to. And yet, he has no concern whatsoever for ever being held accountable. And so again, these are just ideas. These are just, some plot point ideas, by using a literary license, because this very license actually gives the writer, the author, permission to not obey any kinds of rules. And so, there could be multiple scenes where this main character might have such a lust for power that it has him consistently lying about lying. I know, it's a thing, right? I mean, I think it's pathological, more like a disorder of some kind, but, has this main character lying about lying because that's his language. But like any good circus carny, he has bamboozled those in his circle of influence. And so he has no concern whatsoever about ever being held accountable. And so, my dear ones, thank goodness we are not living in an Alfred Hitchcock film. I mean, whew, right? But if we were, even if we were, one of Hitchcock's greatest gifts as a filmmaker was his talent, and I mean truly a gift, to tell a story without using any dialogue. In other words, he loved creating silent scenes. Now, of course, there was wonderful score, musical score, but he loved to create scenes without dialogue. Why? Because actions speak louder than words. Let me just say that again. Actions speak louder than words. And so in this real life story that we are living together, that we're growing through together, we are all responsible for what happens next. And this is the really good news, because The way to stay focused and not get sidetracked in all of those possible plot points, the ones that are, continuing to try to sell you fear, doubt, and worry, the way to do that is with prayer. It is your prayer practice that will save you. Prayer is your spiritual anchor. This is why you hear me say that you no longer have the luxury of not having a daily prayer and meditation practice. You no longer have the luxury of not quieting your mind so that you can tune into your divine guidance about what is yours to do. Now, Unity co-founder Myrtle Fillmore wrote about it this way. She said, "A period of quiet and rest each day is your opportunity to establish yourself at the center of your being, the one place where the supply of life is inexhaustible." And I love how she uses the word inexhaustible here, because it's a great reminder that the center of your being is unending. In other words, it is constant and it is perpetual. This reminds me that when I was in seminary, one of my teachers, Reverend Norma Iris Rezado, she would say over and over and over again. So it is in my cellular memory. She would say over and over and over again, you must pray 26 hours a day. You must pray 26 hours a day. And so, on the surface, in the moment, I thought I knew what she meant, but later I would find myself very reflective upon this idea and delving in deeper. And, I began to wonder, well, what does this really mean? I mean, does this mean nonstop? Does this mean never quitting? And how do I do that? How do I pray without ceasing? And so in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul invites us to rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances. Scripture says, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances. Now, I don't know about you, but without ceasing is a really long time, right? But this isn't about the literal interpretation here. It's about the deeper understanding that to pray without ceasing is to meet whatever comes to us with faith and with love. And so what Paul means here is that we should pray like breathing. Pray like breathing, something that we do continually, something that is always in motion, and something that we do without even really knowing it. And so there's another aspect of prayer that I want to share with you as we've been talking about affirmative prayer. And that is a little something that I like to call prayer mojo. Say that with me, prayer mojo. Now, full transparency here, you are not going to find this term in any of Unity's wonderful books that have been written about prayer, or at least not yet anyway. But for me, prayer mojo is the very essence of affirmative prayer. And here's what I mean by that. Prayer mojo is that quality of your prayer consciousness that anchors you in the spiritual knowing, like you know that you know that you know, beyond any appearance, beyond how things are appearing on the outside, that everything's going to be okay. It's all going to be all right. And you know that you know that you know this. That is prayer mojo. In other words, prayer mojo is knowing your truth. For example, it could be knowing the truth of your healing and wholeness. It could be knowing the truth of your prosperity. It could be knowing the truth of your divine guidance as you turn within and listen. Listen to that quiet voice that is telling you what is yours to do. Make sense? Are you with me? And so with that, I want to share a personal story with you that happened years ago. And this happened during a time when David and I were actually preparing to move from California to Florida, cross-country move. And at this particular time, all of our possessions had been packed up on a 27-foot trailer and had left the state. But the real estate closing on our house was delayed, and so were we, right? So we were in an empty house. That's actually happened a couple of times to us. But one afternoon, some friends came over to say goodbye, and we were talking and chatting and walking around in our empty, echoey house. And one of the friends happened to notice that the diamond from my engagement ring, from my wedding ring setting, was no longer in its setting. I was like, what? And I looked down and, oh, to my horror, it in fact was missing. And so I guess through all of, those weeks of packing and whatnot, it got jarred loose and it indeed had fallen out. And so we started scouring every inch of this house, inside and out. And I mean, at one point, we're looking amongst the dirt and the rubble in the back area, and very carefully, because when an aquarium that I had broken and shattered, and so there was glass everywhere. And so we were being very careful, but I suddenly had a knowing just wash over me, a knowing that regardless of how ridiculous it seemed, I mean, literally we were looking for a needle in a haystack, that somehow, some way, a way was going to be made. And I was not leaving the state of California without my diamond. And I remember quietly, even as David and friends were looking all around me, I remember quietly praying, God, I know you have a sense of humor, but this is not funny. And I am not leaving without this. I am not leaving without my wedding diamond. So let the miracles begin. I mean, I remember that like it was right now. And somehow, don't ask me how, I just knew, I just had this knowing wash over me, and I knew that a way would be made. Well, about this time, a guy that we had contracted to come and haul away some of those last remains, some rubble, he showed up in our backyard, and he offered to help in the search. Now, mind you, we didn't know this guy. I mean, we had just hired him off of Craigslist. So imagine my surprise after David and I and our friends had looked, I mean, oh my goodness, we had looked high and low. So imagine our surprise when right there on the patio, in the midst of all of this rubble, the aquarium that had shattered glass, this stranger bends down picks up a glittering white stone and says, "Is this it?" Well, it was. It was my wedding diamond. Man, I kissed and hugged that guy until we were both a little embarrassed, quite honestly, but I was not surprised. And I want you to hear that. I was not surprised. I mean, it's a great story, right? But I knew the intensity of my prayer mojo, and I knew that against all odds, it would be found. And it was. You see, I believed in the living energy of God, that God was in the midst of the situation and that only good was going to be brought forth in faith and in love. And I was open to receive it. And that is prayer mojo. Are you catching this? Are you getting this? Are you with me? Are you with me? Now, Unity Minister, one of my favorites, Eric Butterworth. Now, he didn't call it prayer mojo, not in so many words. That's not what he called it. But here's what he wrote. He said, "God is the ceaseless longing to express totally and completely in you. But as long as you have a negative consciousness, you have the on switch turned off. This is why God can do no more for you than God can do through you." And so my prayer for you today is that you take this with you. God can do no more for you than God can do through you. So let's just say that together, right? God can do no more for you than God can do through you. And now let's say me. God can do no more for me than God can do through me. Let's say that again. God can do no more for me than God can do through me. Do you feel the power of that? And so, I want to leave you with a beautiful prayer, an affirmative prayer, one that many of us are familiar with and love, with just a little minor unity twist. Now, this is the beloved prayer of Saint Francis. And this particular version is found in the Handbook of Positive Prayer by the one and only Hypatia Hasbrook. So, settle in and just allow these beautiful words to just wash over you and soak it in. Lord, I am an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, I sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, fear. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, I do not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying to the human self that we are born into the eternal Christ. I want to repeat that one line again, a take two. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is doubt, faith. And so this prayer is the blueprint, isn't it? This is how actions speak louder than words. This is how we all take part in what happens next. And this is the power of affirmative prayer. And so ends our message for today. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.